Hello and welcome to my channel In Search of Wonder. My name is Anne and this is my weekly reading wrap-up. Normally I do a vlog style weekly reading wrap-up and I share some clips from the week and I record as I go through the week my reviews of the books. But this week is a little bit different because we were away most of the week. And so I am going to be sharing later on this week a vlog, more of a vlogish style. It's kind of a hybrid vlogish style video of all of the things that we did on our vacation, including some fun bookish stuff. And yes, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm excited to share that with you. But for my weekly reading wrap up, I just want to go real quick over the books that I finished reading this week and my reading progress on books that I have in progress that I'm still working on. And then a mid-month update that is a little bit late. We only have 1 week left in the month of June and I'm not doing so great with the challenges and stuff, but I will have it at the end, a little update of that. So that is the plan for today. First of all, the books that I finished reading. The first one is The Great Eight by Scott Hamilton. To be fair, I mostly skim read this one. And I'm reading it for another project that I'm working on that I'm also recording videos about, trying to get rid of some things on my books on my shelf. And there are just some books that I have been wanting to read, just haven't gotten to, and I decided I needed to read them or get rid of them. Or decide if I want to keep them. So I'm reading the first chapter or I am skimming them, whatever, to decide if I want to keep them or not. And so this one, I read enough of it, like I skim read it, like I said, so I didn't read every single detail, but I read it enough to say that I read it all the way through. And because I read all the way to the last page, I got the total gist of it. I really enjoyed the parts of this book that talked about Scott Hamilton's life and the lessons that he learned through his life. I knew some about his childhood already, but there was more about that and about his health issues that he's had throughout his life that he's still dealing with to this day. And also about his coming to faith, which was my favorite part of that because I had not heard that part of his testimony and I really enjoyed that. This is actually published by Thomas Nelson, which is Christianish publishing company. So it was very good. I enjoyed it. I love Scott Hamilton. I love his attitude. I love his perspective on life. And he just seems like a really solid guy. And I really enjoyed reading this. It is more of, I was reading it more for the memoir aspect of it. That's why I picked up. I didn't even realize what it actually was. It's more like a kind of self-help, inspiring thing. Like if you went to one of his speeches that he gives, you know, as a keynote speaker at various events, it would be similar to what he would speak about. So kind of like a, you know, big brother giving you a pep talk and encouraging you in your life, encouraging you to have a good attitude. It's all good advice. It's all solid advice. I didn't disagree with anything he said, but that's not generally my line of book that I love to read. I just read it because it was by him and I like Scott Hamilton. So overall, I gave it 3 stars and I will be, I think I'll be putting that in a little free library somewhere. And then I also read The White City by Grace Hitchcock. And I don't have a copy of that to show you at the moment, so let me share with you a little video about that. So I just finished reading this book yesterday, and it's not one I want to keep, and I have a whole bag of books in my car, and I just want to, you know, offload it. So we're here at this really awesome restaurant / grocery store, really cool place off the Swamp Rabbit Trail, and they have a little free library. So I'm going to drop this off in the free library. So that's why I don't have a copy to show you. And I didn't really talk in that video about my thoughts about the book. It was fine. It was, you know, a fun story. It was not very dark or suspenseful at all. It was very, the tone of it was very lighthearted throughout. It was more of almost a rom-com, not super funny, just lighthearted. I think Jen Toronto. I would definitely put, like if you like Jen Toronto, then you would like this book by Grace Hitchcock. Very similar. And this girl, at the time of the World's Fair in Chicago, she lives in Chicago. Her father is the inspector of the police, so he's like high up there, and she is privy to a lot of the inner workings of the police system and detective stuff, and so she gets involved in this case. You kind of have to throw reality out the window. It's a bit of an escapist read. It's a bit madcap, and it is, however, based on true events of true crimes that were committed during the Chicago World's Fair. They described the criminal in question as one of the first serial killers in America. So it's an interesting story, but it is told from a very lighthearted perspective, even though the crimes that he committed were horrible and he was an awful guy. It was fun. I'm glad I read it on vacation. It was a great read for vacation, but that was also on my list of books that I wanted to read or get off of my shelves. So that also I yeeted. So now the third book that I read in a very different vein from either of those is Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora, Neale, Hurston. So this was quite a mixed week of reading, even more so when I tell you all of the ongoing books that I was working on and I'm still working on. But anyways, this was my first by this author, and I think it's her most well-known book. I believe she wrote like 4 novels and some other novellas and some other literary works, but this is probably her most well-known one. And it was written in the 30s. And set in Florida around that time, in I think like the 20s and 30s era, in a Black community. And it was very, very interesting. I really enjoyed reading this. In the end, I think I gave it 4 stars. I would say that from an objective standpoint, I would totally give it 5 stars, because looking at it, as I'm reading it, I loved the craft that she put into her writing and her own unique voice that she used. And I loved her perspective, and she really draws you into the characters' lives. And it's just really well done. And it is uniquely told. It's just really well done. I was blown away by the writing, and I really, from an objective standpoint, I'd say, wow, this is a wonderfully well-written, uniquely told story. And I would highly recommend it to, not to everyone, it wouldn't be to everyone's taste for sure, but I think that it was just a really great book. But subjectively, as far as my own personal enjoyment, I would say more of a 4 star. I didn't love the main character and the choices that she was making. And that was part of the story, but at the same time, she wasn't necessarily, like, some really horrible choices that she made were not necessarily portrayed as that. I mean, obviously she's learning as she goes and she's learning from her mistakes and everything, but I would probably disagree with the author on some of the perspective of her choices and the attitudes that she had. And it's hard to put it into words, but for the first 2/3 of the book with this main character, Janie, I was like, girl, you literally made a choice, and this is the direct result of choices that you made, and you're not wanting to acknowledge that. There was no acknowledgement that mistakes, like things that she had done wrong, contributed to her situation. She knew what she wanted, but she couldn't define it. She wanted more than what she had. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to build your life into something and not to get stuck and trapped in a place where you are not loved or valued, or feel like you are contributing productively, with your life. So I get that, but she couldn't really define it. She just knew that she wanted more than what she had. And basically, no matter what she did, she wanted more. Ironically, until she ends up, and I don't want to spoil anything, but she ends up with this one guy that probably of the 3 men that she's involved with in the course of this story, I wouldn't have picked personally. I wouldn't have called it, but because he loved her as she was and wasn't trying to change her, she found a great deal of freedom in that relationship and was the most satisfied, I guess, in that relationship, even though she didn't have a life of ease or a life of luxury. Far from it. It was a hard life physically with this guy, but because she was loved as she was, and because she loved this guy, then she was happy. So there were some aspects of that story that I would disagree with the worldview and the perspective, and I would say that there's a little more shade or nuance that I wouldn't quite be fully on board with everything that's being promoted or put forth as ideal and good. I would be in disagreement with it. In reality, I think that a fulfilling and satisfying life would probably look a little different in reality. But suffice it to say, our girl Janie learns some hard lessons along the way. She does learn some things, and she experiences some struggles, and you're just really drawn into her story. And I really enjoy stories where the character is complex and is neither wholly good nor wholly bad. And you can see their flaws, and you can see what's driving them, and you can see their weaknesses, but you can also see where their heart is and what is driving them and why they're making the choices that they make. And that's why I really love reading stories, because then you can learn about another perspective from your own, and it wouldn't be, just always people and things and situations that you've experienced and or that you agree with, or that you would do it the same way. It helps you to understand other people, I guess. So in that sense, I really appreciated this book. And also there were some very tragic things that happened in this story. It's not an easy light read, although there are a lot of funny moments in it, for sure. I was highlighting with different colors quotes that I liked or quotes that I found like interestingly put or funny, and there were actually surprisingly a lot of funny comments on there that made me chuckle and laugh out loud. Like one, her grandma says to her towards the beginning of the book, her grandma says, "I ain't getting old, honey. I'm done old." I also highlighted some lines in the book that either she wrote it in such an interesting way that it grabbed my attention. And I love it when authors do that. That's one thing I love most about this book, was how she phrased things in an almost poetic way. It wasn't just straightforward English. I mean, it was all English, but it wasn't like straightforward direct words that we're used to. It's more poetically phrased, and I really enjoyed that. And I highlighted so many things in this book. Let me see if I can find a couple of examples to share with you. And sometimes it was like beautifully said, and sometimes it just described something so differently and so uniquely, it made you think, oh wow, that was so interesting. Like, I just loved how she put that. Here's one. "The years took all the fight out of Janie's face." And that just says so much in one simple sentence. This is so interesting how she put this. Speaking of her husband and thinking about her husband. "For the first time, she could see a man's head naked of its skull. She saw the cunning thoughts race in and out through the caves and promontories of his mind, long before they darted out the tunnel of his mouth." Again, speaking of her husband. "She stood there until something fell off the shelf inside her. Then she went inside there to see what it was. It was her image of Jody, her husband, tumbled down and shattered." Oh, I like this. "She didn't change her mind, but she agreed with her mouth." All right, one last one. "Mind pictures brought feelings, and feelings dragged out dramas from the hollows of her heart." So I really loved the writing in this one. Thoroughly enjoyed that. So 4.5 stars, splitting the difference between my objective appreciation and my subjective enjoyment of the story. 4.5 stars. Those were all of the books that I completed this week. I did get a lot of reading done because we were in the car for a good amount of time. And also when we were finished for the day and we went back to the hotel, several days there were just a few hours that we were just relaxing and not doing much. So I did get a lot of reading done. So I am continuing to read in Paradise Lost by John Milton. And I am enjoying this so much more than I initially was or thought that I would. When I read the first book, I read it on my Kindle from Project Gutenberg or something, and it was fine. There were things about it that I enjoyed, and it was, you know, all well and good, but I don't know where I was. I had got a little interrupted. But anyways, Paradise Lost. I was originally reading it on Kindle, wasn't loving it, found things to enjoy in it and appreciated it as a work of art and literature, but wasn't personally loving it. And then I found this hard copy, which I had been looking for an annotated copy because I felt like I needed a little bit of guidance with the story, with the poem. So I got this annotated copy at the used bookstore a week or so ago, and it has a lot of notes at the bottom. It has definitions of words. It has some explanations of some of the prior literature that John Milton is referencing, especially Greek mythology. He mentions a lot of, like, there is a high presence of Greek mythology in here, plus some history and works by Edmund Spenser, and other poets and literary giants of the past that he is referencing as he is writing this. So there are a lot of connections to be made. So I really have enjoyed that. But even more so, I also picked up this Monarch Notes, which is kind of like, you know, a vintage version of like Spark Notes sort of thing. And what this one does is it takes sections of each poem. So this is an epic poem divided into 12 books. And this one divides each book into sections depending on what, like paragraphs sort of. They're not really divided so much into paragraphs here, except for when it's a distinction between people talking to each other. But it takes a section and then it summarizes it in plain English, like it rephrases it for you. And so it's intended for someone, I guess, to read this instead of this, but I'm finding it very useful to read it in conjunction. So I read this section here and then I read the summary here just to make sure I don't miss anything, and it adds a little bit of depth to it. Then it has some commentary at the end of each book that is just really interesting discussion of this story. And this one is providing some great technical help in terms of vocabulary and literary connections, etc. But it's obviously written from a very skeptical perspective. Whoever is writing these annotations is looking at this strictly as a piece of literature and is not taking the story that John Milton is telling seriously, which is the story of the fall of Adam and Eve. And it's the story of the relationship between God and Satan and the creation of the world. I mean, there's a lot in here. But they're not looking at it, obviously, from a biblical perspective, except as literary. So it's strictly literary. Okay, once again, I was interrupted. My phone ran out of storage. So I don't really know where I was, but suffice it to say, I'm really enjoying this one. I feel like this one is more, I don't know, whoever wrote this is definitely much more appreciating what John Milton is doing and is just taking it at face value and is on board with it. And so I really much more appreciate that positive perspective of it than the kind of critical one that is in this one. Although there is much that is helpful in this, I'm glad that I have both of them. So I'm kind of reading those together, and I made it all the way through book 4. So I'm not quite halfway through, I'm a third of the way through Paradise Lost. And now I'm at the point where I'm actually really enjoying it and really admiring it. Speaking of objective versus subjective, both, I'm fully on board with this, really enjoying it. And I love how because of the big subjects that John Milton is dealing with, he's getting into, it almost feels sometimes like there's sci-fi in a way. Obviously, this was long before sci-fi was a thing. It was written long before sci-fi was a thing. But, you know, you're talking about Satan and his demons were cast into hell. And so he's trying to get to Earth because he hears about, you know, Adam and Eve being created and everything, and he's like, aha, I can stick it to him, you know, him being God, and I can hurt him by hurting Adam and Eve. But there's like a whole journey that he has to take through space and through, you know, there's all this discussion of the cosmos, of the universe, and then outside the universe, and chaos, and the creation of, you know, all of this stuff that you would find in a sci-fi or a fantasy novel of some kind. So it's really interesting. It's definitely very epic, and it's an epic poem, so that makes sense. There is also, you know, another modern subgenre of fiction is biblical fiction. It's definitely an example of that, because he's taking what we know to be true, but he's also imagining it in much greater detail than is put forth in the Bible, and he's drawing on tradition and other thinkers and other poets and other authors of the past and their thoughts on how all of these things happened. And there's definitely some theology in there. He was a Puritan, so the theology is very much along those lines. So I'm really enjoying it, very much so, and much more than I thought that I would. I didn't bring it over here for my filming, so I will just leave it where it is right now, but I am also reading Les Miserables, and I am trying to get through volume 4. There are 5 volumes in Les Mis, and I finished book 3, I think, of volume 4. Now, volume 4 has more books in it. Each volume has multiple books, and volume 4 has like 12 books, I think, in it. So I still have like 200 pages left in just volume 4. But then volume 5 is a shorter one. So I'm trying to get through volume 4 at least through by the end of June. And then I just have volume 5 left, which is, you know, just like 250 pages. So slowly working my way through that one, and definitely enjoying it. Just, I have so many other things I don't have the time that I really want to read, and that are like time sensitive for one reason or another, that I just can't devote as much time to Les Miserables as I would have otherwise. So that's why it's taking me so long. And then And the Dead Shall Rise, I did not make any progress on that this week. I didn't bring it with me on vacation because it was such a big book. Les Miserables, I have a Kindle version of the same translation that I have in the print version. So I was reading the Kindle of that. I am also still reading a very little bit at a time with Miriam, the Heir of Redclyffe Hall, and a little more than halfway through that one. And I didn't make much progress on that this week. But I'm also reading Love Overboard with Shannon at Old American Spirit. She's doing a summer book reading club and summer reading book club. Anyway, Love Overboard is what the group is reading, and she has a Goodreads group that you can join. They are discussing it 5 chapters a day. So that is Love Overboard. It's like it seems to be a bit of a cozy mystery going on here, as well as romance, but it's centered around these 4 retired women who their retirement is to cruise on cruise ships, and they're good friends, so they call themselves the Shippers, and they try to matchmake people on the cruises with each other. So it provides a lot of humor and entertainment. So this is a great fun summer read. So I am enjoying that one, 5 chapters a day. I also picked up for the historical fiction readathon A Moonbow Night by Laura Frantz, and have not gotten very far in this, but I want to read this one for the historical fiction readathon. So that is what I have read this week. Now I want to see, I have about a week left in the month of June, and I want to see how I'm doing with the various reading challenges and readathons and my TBR for June. Let's see. First of all, my TBR is turning out to be like nothing like I planned. So yeah, I'm reading different books than what I had said that I would, because different books are interesting me, and I realized some of those wouldn't work. I had picked some categories from Tiffany's summer book bingo, and had picked some books that I would read for them. And I realized some of them that I had put on there would not work, because I had already started them, and then I remembered that I needed to read it in the summer. Those didn't count, so cross those off the list. Even though I'm still reading them, they don't work for the summer book bingo. And then I am actually reading totally different categories on the book bingo in June than what I originally intended. So like none of them are actually happening. So there's that. And then for the historical fiction readathon by Shelley Swearingen, I had originally said that for the country that I'm from, I'm going to read A Moonbow Night, which I just started, but actually what was not even on my list here was The White City by Grace Hitchcock, which I read and instead for that category. So I read something, I just didn't read what I originally intended. And then in a different country, I said that I would read Shadow Over Moscow, or Shadow in Moscow, something like that, by Catherine Ray, which I actually have from the library. And I would like to read it, but instead, Alma from Alma's Book Journey had organized a buddy read of Children of the Stars by Mario Escobar, which I had on my shelves, and I opted to read that instead. So that's what I read for In a Different Country. So again, I read for the category, I just read something totally different. A new to me time period. I don't even know if I will have anything for that one because I feel like I've read them all. Ancient history would be one that I haven't, and I do have options for that, but I don't think I'm going to get to those. Speculative or magical realism element. There are some that I know of that I'm interested in reading. I just don't have the time to get to that in June. And then from the perspective of an ordinary person, I have Listening Valley on the list, which I really want to get to, but I only have a week left. I don't think I'm going to read it in a week. And then for the mystery or romance, I had two books on here, The Elusive Truth of Lily Temple and The British Booksellers, both of which I want to read, but didn't happen. The British Booksellers, actually, I got a notification from the library that it was in, but then I never had time to go pick it up. So they put that back and gave it on to the next person, I'm sure. So, and then The Elusive Truth of Lily Temple, I believe, is waiting for me at the library now, but I don't know if I will get to it. But what I did read was, and I read this with Lindsay Lamus, which was great. We had a great time. The Vanishing of Castle Monroe. So I put that in this spot as a mystery or romance historical fiction. And then the classic work that I wanted to read was The Scarlet Pimpernel, which has been on my TBR for like 2 months now, and I want to read it, reread it, but I just haven't yet. Other items on my TBR for June were reading Anne's House of Dreams for the What the Dickens Facebook book club, which they are actually, their meeting is this coming Tuesday, and they're actually reading Anne of Green Gables, but I am rereading the whole series, and I already reread Anne of Green Gables fairly recently, and I didn't want to go back and reread that one. I wanted to read the next in the series instead, and I haven't done that yet, and I have like 4 days. So we'll see. I don't know. I have a busy weekend, so I don't know, but I do want to read Anne's House of Dreams. And then one thing on my TBR that I actually did was Tea and Ink Society. I was supposed to read a classic from the American South, and I read Their Eyes Were Watching God. So one thing on my TBR I did actually read. And then for Read Your Shelf Challenge with Chantel Reads All Day, I had initially planned to do the poetry side and read Paradise Lost. And I am reading that and working on it. I just don't know that I'm quite going to finish it in June, but I'm working on it, definitely getting there. However, I realized that after I made my whole TBR video and everything, that the Doyle track was sci-fi or fantasy. And I read The Recorder because I decided that I wanted to. So I read The Recorder, and so I actually stayed on the Doyle track, which is what I started out the year on. I had hoped to switch, but I stayed on the track. But in the end, I might, again, for the third month in a row, finish both prompts unintentionally. Finally, I just wanted to go over where I am at with the summer book bingo with Beautiful Minutia. Where is that one? So I put it in my journal here, and I'm keeping track of what I have read. So far, I have read 6 books, but I'm not anywhere near a bingo. Like, not even close. They're not. The most I have is 2. I have 2 in this row. I have 2 in this row. I have 2 in this column, 2 in this column, and 1 in each of these columns. So I'm nowhere near a bingo, but I have read 6 books. So what I have read so far is for the classic, I read Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston. And then in that same row, there's the category Joyful, or the prompt Joyful, and The Great 8 by Scott Hamilton, which the subtitle of that is How to Be Happy Even When You Have Every Reason to Be Miserable. So that totally fits there. Don't have anything in the second row or the third row, but in the fourth row, for Friendship or Found Family, that prompt, I read The Vanishing at Castle Moreau by Jamie Jo Wright. The resolution of the story of the mystery in that book revealed a very beautiful found family and friendship. So that was, I enjoyed that actually. And then the next one is Vacation or Travel and The Children of the Stars by Mario Escobar. The children in that story, they travel all the way through France, and then they get on a boat and they go across the world to South America and end up in Argentina. So there was a lot, like their traveling takes up a significant portion of the book. So, and then in the last row, sci-fi or fantasy, I read Recorder by Kathy McCrum, and I really enjoyed that. And then a new to me author, The White City by Grace Hitchcock. So I had never read anything by Grace Hitchcock, and she's actually an author that has been in the back of my mind that I want to try. So I read a book by her that was a new to me author. So I am making progress on the summer book bingo, except I don't have any bingos yet. I have not strategized that very well at all. So we will see what happens this coming week and how much more progress I'm able to make in the month of June. I'm not hopeful, but you know, anything can happen. So that is my weekly reading wrap up for this week, and I will see you later this week with more details of our trip to Redclyffe.